and I hear the whistle here in Fort Atkinson, the noon whistle.
All right.
So this is my clue, or cue rather, to say that this is Steve Larson with the Hoard Dairyman staff up here, welcoming all of you out there that are joining us today. We've got a nice big bunch of you out there. And I think for most of you, this week is a welcome change from fighting the elements a week ago today, whether it was snow or wind or cold or a combination. And so we're glad to see things a little bit back to normal across the country, and we're glad to have you with us today. Topic today, going to be feed efficiency. What's new? Mike Hutjens, one of our partners on this webinar series, great presenter. Always has some interesting things, and today some new data that he's going to share with us. And so we're looking forward to his presentation. We also always want to acknowledge and thank Jim Baltz, his partner down there at the University of Illinois, who helps with the webinar series as well. Today's webinar brought to us by Digistar, actually a local firm right here in Fort Atkinson, and we're glad to have their support. And Mike, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, very good, Steve, and thank you very much. And we're kind of excited. I think the topic today is going to be challenging. We're going to have some interesting questions. I'm kind of curious to see how people respond to it. And it says feed efficiency, what's new? And again, I also want to thank Digistar for their support. I was talking with Steve earlier. Had this been last Monday, you would not have had a webinar. Jim was snowed in, I was snowed in, and nothing was moving in Champaign. But today's a good day, and we're off and running. So let's talk about today's webinar, looking at feed efficiency. And you'll notice the Guernseys, Jim Baltz decided to do that for you Hoard's Dairyman crew over there. You should be singing Kumbaya at this point. Anyway, what are we going to do for the next 45 minutes? We're going to talk a little bit about understanding feed efficiency, but the real focus is what's new. And that's kind of exciting to me. And then, of course, for some of you producers online, what can you do today? How can I use that on my farm, at the farm level, be it dairy manager, consultant, veterinarian, or whatever hat you happen to be wearing here today. So here we go. Steve, we're going to start voting right from the get-go, and says, what is your definition of feed efficiency? So those are new to us. You get to vote, and once. This is not Chicago rules. You only get to vote once. A is pounds, or if you're in international, the kilograms of energy-corrected milk per pound or per unit of feed. That's one choice. Next one is nitrogen. The next one down is solids per hectare, or solids per acre on the dairy farm. And the last one is looking at something Steve alluded to, and that would be the pounds or amount of solids per carbon credit or carbon investment in producing the milk. So we'll open the polls. Jim, are they open? Okay, polls are open.
Yeah,
and
voting has started, it looks like, and I picked my choice. So we'll see how it goes. Oh my goodness, we're fast voters today.
Wow,
60, over 2/3 people have voted already. So, boy, there's not much indecision on this one, Mike.
No, let's shut this off. Jim, will our attendees see it right now? They're seeing it right now, and I was surprised. It must be a lot of Republicans, Steve, because that's the traditional definition there. But you know what? I thought I'd get more votes for number 2, because I think number 2 is going to become very important on feed efficiency, and that is nitrogen efficiency. More about that a bit later. The 5% might be some people from pasture-based systems. If you go to a pasture-based system, people look at things coming per unit of land there. And then, of course, I think this carbon footprint is going to get big. And our consumers are going to say, how efficient are you dairy farmers using this very important carbon in terms of producing milk? So kind of interesting. And we move on. By the way, here, this actually comes from a PowerPoint that I manipulated a bit from Mike Vanderhaar. Here, another whole list. So you can see that when you look at feed efficiencies, that is still a real challenge. And I'm not going to walk you through these. In fact, you're going to have to come back, I think, to the archives. Steve will talk about that at the end of the presentation, because we're going to be moving fairly quickly. And I'm not going to read this stuff to you, but look at all the different ways to express feed efficiency. And I just picked out 4 of them for the test and or for the survey. And obviously, a lot of you are pretty traditional, for lack of a better word. Well, this is a fun slide, and you're going to see this word, Mike Vanderhaar. He is the chair of the Discovery Conference, and he shared his PowerPoints with us, and I've got a couple of them, and we want to give him credit for it. Take a look at this, guys and gals. You look at energy-corrected milk. Now, this is kilograms, so some of us in the U.S., we're talking at 60. You're looking at 132 pounds of milk, 170 kilos of milk. You're looking at 150-plus pounds of milk, but this looks at profitability, so you can see with a 1.4 with that type of dry matter intake production, $5 profitability. You can see if we get over here with a 1.5, there's $11 as we move up this chart. It simply says, guys and gals, there is some big dollars sitting on this chart when you start looking at feed efficiency. But look at the scatter and notice Mike picked out just a few of the unusual points. Notice if you get a cow that's producing over 150 pounds of milk with a feed efficiency over 2, which we can argue may be biologically not good, but $22 profit, and we in Illinois need about 11. So you can see that this cow is going to make an awful lot of profit on that farm or that situation. Here are some guideline numbers that we use at Illinois, just to give you a feel. We didn't know to put this first, but just try to give us some relevance here. You can see that if you look at a one-group TMR, that number is going to be sitting at about 1.5. And I'm pretty sure you folks can see my mouse cursor right there, 1.5. You can see how that changes based on the stage of lactation and the parity or lactation number of these animals. And here's a simple example, both in terms of pounds and kilograms, how to determine that 1.5. Now, I thought I would add this next PowerPoint and says, okay, let's say my herd is got 70 pounds of milk with a 3.9 butterfat test, and I'm feeding 50 pounds of dry matter, but there's a 4% weighback. Well, you can see how this really quickly changes. If you use the traditional formula, 70 divided by 50, that's a 1.4. That's an acceptable feed efficiency. But now if you fine-tune this, simply says, and this is a nice thumb rule for you Holstein breeders out there, you can add or subtract 1 pound of milk for every tenth of a point above or below 3.5. So remember, this was 3.9, so now suddenly you add 4 pounds of milk. Now you can also use the equation you'll see here in the next PowerPoint, but nice thumb rule, and you can see now I have 74 pounds of 3.5 fat-corrected milk. And remember, the weighback is 4%. We'd argue that number should be closer to 1 or 2%. Another argument for another day. But now you can see 2 pounds of dry matter they never consumed. Therefore, it's 48 pounds consumed versus 74 pounds of milk of 3.5 fat-corrected. And now my feed efficiency is 1.54. And ding, 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 as we'd say, that's a winner. That's a winner, as we'd say for you 49 football players out there from San Francisco. Well, that's enough on that. Anyway, it just drives home how really important butterfat and weighbacks components are going to be. Steve, we just put these formulas in for people who would like to use them. By the way, for you folks in Iran and Europe and there, you can just change this pound to kilogram. So if you want to put this kilos of 3.5 fat-corrected milk, then you put in kilos over here and kilos over here. Energy-corrected milk, you can see protein comes into play here. And so here's energy-corrected milk. And academically, that's probably the right answer. So there are your two formulas that you can use and work with your clientele. Now, here's the next one that I say, fat-corrected milk to me is close enough for government work. What I did is took 60 pounds of Jersey milk, 60 pounds of brown Swiss milk, 60 pounds of Holstein milk, and these are your Hoard's Dairyman numbers that came out of the August issue, give or take a little bit. And you can see here is 3.5 fat-corrected basis. This is energy-corrected basis. And notice, guys and gals, that difference is, tenths of a pound. Now, the big difference, obviously, you can see that the Jersey cow has 10 pounds more energy-corrected, fat-corrected milk compared to this Holstein cow down here, and the brown Swiss is in the middle. I guess, Steve, I'll get criticized. I should have used a Guernsey here since you have those at Hoard's farm, but it just gives you an idea. So basically, I see the fat-corrected milk being certainly acceptable, but here's energy-corrected milk, and you can argue academically this is the right answer, but the difference to me is fairly small, and then I use the thumb rules for Holsteins. You cannot use that thumb rule for Jerseys, by the way, that 1 pound of milk for 10th pound of increase. Can't use that for Jerseys or other breeds. It's just Holsteins that it seems to work out fairly well. Why do we spend much time on that? This is a PowerPoint that some of you that will be coming to some of my dairy programs in the next couple of weeks, you'll see this one here. I just highlight down here feed efficiency, a herd with consuming the amount of dry matter. That's 50 pounds of dry matter. Here's your economics. To me, this is a powerful point, but that's not the focus today. You can see this is the 1.6 feed efficiency. If I took that 50 pounds of dry matter and got 80 pounds of 3-5 fat-corrected milk, you can see at 70 pounds of milk, that drops down to 1.4. So there's no question that feed efficiency really has an impact, and you can see some economic numbers. These are the big four as we talk about in our presentations. 12 cents per pound of dry matter, somewhere around $7.75 per unit of a feed cost per hundredweight of milk. Income over feed cost, $19 milk. That probably should now be $21 milk, so that becomes $13. But you see, every time I change these feed prices, this number never changes. And that's the beauty of feed efficiency. It looks at just another unique aspect of the feeding program. Now, that's important if you look at this very simple slide that I borrow from one of my colleagues, and you can see that if I have 70 pounds of Holstein milk with 12 cents per pound of dry matter, if my feed efficiency was 1.4 and you did something on the farm, and we'll point those out right at the end of the webinar if we have time, 1.4 to get it up to 1.5, you can see I've saved 36 cents a day because I've saved that 3 pounds of dry matter times 12 cents. Awfully big number. And so I've been criticized at some meetings saying, well, Mike, feed efficiency doesn't have, income over feed cost is a better number. Well, I would argue it's just a different number. Or you can also do management milk. That was highlighted in Hoard's Dairyman about 2 months ago, an article looking at more of an economic, rather income over feed cost. It has to do with a monetary value. But to me, that still speaks volumes in terms of what we can do. Okay, I borrowed this slide from Norman St. Pierre at that same conference. So if you're looking at what we call gross feed efficiency, and that's really what I use when I work in the field, gross feed efficiency. More about that a bit later. Norman did a nice job because he said, well, that number here are some nice guidelines. So again, hopefully one thing you get from the webinar is a couple of neat benchmarks. And so you can see as milk production goes up, and this is a good herd, a 24,000 pound Holstein herd, you should be around that 1.5. Now, if you really are smoking up here, and of course we have a herd in Wisconsin now that's at 40,000. Can't get that data up here quite yet, but you can just see some really nice targets for those of you that are listening here that are more on the application aspect than the research part. So you might ask, well, why did we select this topic for feed efficiency today? And as Steve mentioned a bit earlier, right now feed represents nearly 50 to 60% of the cost of production. It's probably more closer to 50, maybe even 45% now with our current feed prices on the corn side of the equation. And of course, notice this one here. 5 years ago at dairy meetings, we talked about maximizing dry matter intake. We're now using the word optimizing dry matter intake because of the effects it has on feed efficiency. We already commented on waybacks, and we know feed efficiency is really the measure when you talk to the beef industry, the swine, the poultry, the fish industry. Come on, guys and gals, we got to get on board because that's going to be big in the dairy as well. And why is that important? Because I can take you to farms that have groups of cows that can be as high as over 2.0 and as low below 1.3. In fact, you'll see that right at the end of our presentation. Honest to God, Midwest dairy herd here. So look at the range we had, and remember the economics we had a bit earlier. Well, Steve, the real focus of this webinar is what's new in feed efficiency. And I'm going to let you as people vote out there because, I'm not sure where this is all going to go, but let's ask you right now before we do that. Where do you see the greatest opportunity to improve feed efficiency on dairy farms in where you live? And I've given you 5 choices, and the polls are now open, and you should be voting. 1 is to breed for smaller cows. Number 2 is to use genomically selected animals for improved feed efficiency. Number 3, reduce digestive losses. Number 4, increased grouping on more farms. Number 5, reduce feed losses. And we're off and running. Steve, what are you seeing?
I've got a favorite there, and we'll just see how this plays out. I kind of looking at the sustainability aspects of this and having seen some recent numbers on greenhouse gases and so forth, so that might kind of be where I'd end up on that. We'll see what the rest are saying.
Are you going to tell us what where you voted, Steve?
Yeah, I'm going to go vote for digestive losses.
Digestive losses. Okay. Well, we're let's close it. We give them more time than what they needed. They are now seeing that, and let's take a look at that. By the way, Steve, yours is the most popular, but do you want to bet a piece of pie which one is going to win this one? It's the one at the bottom, the 29%. And that's because I've seen the PowerPoints from Michigan State on this. But it's kind of interesting, isn't it? By the way, all 5 of those are viable answers. All 5 of them are viable answers, but the winner is, just give it away a little bit, and that is reduce feed losses. That is the most important thing we can do today. Now, there's a chance these will shuffle the deck a little bit. Steve, you're going to see some excitement where yours gets in trouble here a little bit from some Virginia Tech data as well. Again, there's that magic name, Mike Vanderhaar, in the bottom, and he simply says, look at the growth. Now, this is energy efficiency. Now, won't that keep you awake at nights looking at that if you look at 2,000 plus our gross efficiency, we're capturing about 20% of the nutrients the cow consumes each day in her diet. Now, consumers, you're saying, are you saying that 80% of the feed these cows eat is not converted into useful energy that I can drink or eat as cheese or consume as yogurt and ice cream? And I'll let you make that answer. Now, what's the good news, Steve? If we go over here, to the 1920s, that was at 10%. So you can see over the last 80 years, we've doubled the efficiency. And notice how steep that is. And these are some benchmarks that Mike Vanderhaar put in. You can argue all you want, but there, Steve, there's your number. It simply says you look at this carbon footprint, and this is that work out of Washington State that's been done. You can see the carbon footprint, what's happened on our carbon footprint. You can see, just about a 60% reduction there. Kind of a neat chart. And my point is this is going to get a lot steeper, a lot quicker, because we have not really focused on feed efficiency in many of our management factors and recommendations on dairy farms. Really a fun one to come back and look at, folks. Fun PowerPoint. So where are we going to go? We went to the Discover Conference. This was held, you can see, and I think there's 3 or 4 of the people that are on the webinar today, so you can kind of go get a cup of coffee if you want. You've heard this already once, but there was 160 plus of us over there at Naperville, and it was an excellent conference. I think we had 13 or 14 countries represented, about 35 different states, a real interesting think tank, and that's what these Discover Conferences are. In fact, a year from this date here, Randy Shaver is leaving one on starch. And some of you online want to get in line. That's going to be a crackerjack of a presentation. And then animal care is going to be this spring. And that's going to be up in that area as well. So put that on your calendars and be thinking about that. So certainly, why was this conference held? And here are the 5 bullet items. Steve, yours are right there on number 3, reduce methane production. Carbon footprint, number 4, reduce manure output. Those are awfully big factors as we look at our dairy industry now in terms of can we adjust that. Certainly, the first one is getting a lot of attention, and that is genetic markers associated with high efficient dairy cows. And then, of course, using that as a selection criteria by dairy farmers on dairy farms. You know, Steve, I'm sure you see that at the Hoard's Dairyman farm, but you'll see sometimes cows, especially if they're in a box stall or in a stanchion barn, that eat just an average amount of feed, and yet they put out a boatload of milk. And farmers will say, why does this one cow or these several cows produce so much more milk compared to the rest of the herd mates there? And so actually our farmers have seen this happening already. So let's talk about one of the really big tools that's very controversial. So put this in your think tank, and that's residual feed intake. Residual feed intake is being used very popularly in the beef industry. Heritability, you can see, is quite high, 0.33. That's as high as milk fat and milk protein is on the beef industry. If you look at RFI, there are other measurements of feed industry drop down a little bit. The dairy industry for RFI, the calculated number was 0.06. So wow, that's kind of a sobering tool, and you'll see that we need to find a better benchmark than RFI. What is RFI? Well, you can see it's listed there. That's the amount of feed we predict the cow is going to consume versus what she actually consumes. So at one time, not very often in life is negative being good, but here we go. A negative RFI, or relative feed index, is good, and certainly that's the kind of cows or the bulls that transmit that is what you're looking for. Now, here's your challenges. We're going to come back and talk about about that a little bit later. Now, again, you can see Dr. Mike Vanderhaar graphically. There they are. So any cow that is below the red-greenish line, reddish are primarily the first calf heifers. The green ones are multiparous, which are second or third lactation or older cows. But any cow that's dotted below that, and that is data, individual cow data, any of those cows below the line are your most efficient cows, and that's the kind of cows that you and I want on the farm. So the question is, how do we find them? How do we select them? And what can we do about to make these cows even more efficient? Powerful, powerful data set that Vanderhaar has put together. Now, the excitement goes around this one, and some of you have heard about this. I'm not going to read this to you, but there is a big national program. You can see, I think there's 12 or 13 universities involved in this, and Michigan State is leading that effort. Your University of Wisconsin is located there as well. We in Illinois were not included in this group, and we'll leave it at that. You can see the goals listed there, but the number one goal you can see is to collect 8,000 individual data sets on cows to look at this thing genomically and then determine if we can architecturally select for that. It's almost, like we now can genomically identify cows that have better, which genes have better daughter averages or lower somatic cell count. So we're using this technique already. The problem we have, Steve, and that is we have no data. Now, you say mastitis, well, you go to DHI. Reproduction, you go to DHI. Milk components, you go to DHI. And the problem is that there is no individual cow data coming in at this point. And that's what one of the big functions of this is going to be. I'll let you read points 3, 4, and 5 at your leisure. But certainly, this is the big project. And this, hang on to your hats, folks. This is one of those big NIFA grants. And I believe this one's a $5 million grant. So away we go. Let's take a look then. So that's one story from the U.S. That story is just being played out right now, and there really was no data presented there. But let's go to those Australians. And what they have done is they're going to do some DNA marker as well, but they're also going to look at rumen microflora programming. So, Steve, that's kind of back in your bailiwick about improving feed digestibility. Fascinating what they have done. They have taken 900 6-month-old calves from around Australia, and they have monitored these growth rates individually in these 900 animals. They're taking the top 600 calves and the lowest 600 calves, and they're going to genetically profiling, hoping that that is going to track into lactation. Maybe the word I'm being a bit harsh, but that's their criteria. Now, be well aware this is a pasture-based system, and they think in Australia that if they can get this done, that they'll have 80 million something NPV. Maybe somebody online can tell me what that is. I Googled it. It didn't come up for me. And anyway, there's a big economic value there. So they're going to take these animals and then track them genomically and also individually and see if they can find these very unique cows as indicated by their growth criteria. Here comes a European effort. It's called DMI, Global Dry Matter Initiative. 10 countries, 15 different groups. There's a couple groups from the United States in that as well. They now have 9,000 genomically tested animals. And so they are now looking at some almost 600,000 SNPs. Those are your nucleotide parts that you use for genomics that we use for selecting bulls nowadays. And you can see what they're looking at this point. They're looking at various genetic markers to see if it's going to go. My impression from this researcher, you can see from the Wageningen, and that's over in the Netherlands, that they're actually going to add this to their selection criteria in 2014. They are that confident that they're going to be that close, so they're going to be off and running. And we do have an answer from Andy, and he says net present value. How about that? Thank you, Andy. That's what it stands for, net present value. Ask and you shall receive. Okay, here comes the European meta-analysis. This comes out of a journal paper that Jim found for us. A meta-analysis. This includes both beef and dairy. And you can see they're just doing an overall, not creating new data, but a big data set here, both beef and dairy side of it. The results were pretty interesting because they looked at both the efficiency of energy and nitrogen, which obviously is protein here. They're using something called digestible energy intake. We would struggle a little bit in the U.S. on grasping that, but unless you're collecting manure samples and doing that kind of a research. But you can see the good news is that if we saw an improvement in energy, we saw an improvement in nitrogen as well. And I am convinced that nitrogen is going to become much, much more important as we look at this very hungry world coming to us in the next 25 or 30 years. So again, another data set. USDA gave their update report. This is data that they have at this point, 453 lactations. You can see heifers and cows listed there. Again, they're using the residual feed intake was the estimates they were using, and they adjusted that for a metabolic weight. They adjusted for average daily gain and for energy-corrected milk. Norman St. Pierre says that's still not enough correction, but certainly that helps us out. Their heritability, however, was much higher than was listed earlier, a 0.36 repeatability using RFI. So they're still pretty excited about RFI, and the repeatability was 0.56. So you geneticists can recognize that this is a fairly good number as far as repeatability. What was interesting to me was at the conference, he said two things they found when they did this was they had the higher feed efficiency with less time per feeding per day. In other words, cows that had smaller meal sizes, I get, and those cows that ate slower. And I'm not sure what that means when we go to the buffet this weekend with my wife, but maybe I'll be more efficient if I eat slower, Jim. Maybe that's not good, though. That means I'll get fatter. We move on. So that was kind of in a nutshell, the research at that Discover Conference I thought was pretty fascinating. Notice there's a number of countries looking at this. What are our challenges? Well, the beef has it pretty easy. So do pig guys. So do chicken guys. So do fish guys, because they're all looking at growth. And growth is pretty easy to estimate, pretty easy to model. And residual feed intakes are certainly a tool you can use. Lactating cows are challenges. It's pointed out by Norman St. Pierre. Obviously, we have milk that has different energy contents, and certainly we have different maintenance along with growth requirements. And that gets us into this big cow, small cow discussion a bit later. Pregnancy becomes a factor as well. These cows become pregnant. They also gain body weight, which change energy dynamics. And of course, we can have milk that has a different fatty acid profile, having more conjugated linoleic acids, for example, that may be demanded by our consumers in the future. And certainly we know protein levels in the milk can change as well as we go through this. Now, are there opportunities? And this excites me. I think some of our nutritionists online will get excited. Is there a way that we can reduce maintenance requirements? In other words, instead of having to spend 10 NCALs per day for a Holstein, can I spend 7 for a Jersey? That's metabolic size. What about cell replacement, meaning that cells have to be worn out? You do that every day as a human. We do that as cows as well. What about reducing protein turnover in the cow? Can we slow that down? So therefore, I can devote more amino acids to productive functions. What about fat storage? Should we be putting body condition on these cows? Should we be taking it on off? And then what about, Steve, some of these things you were thinking about, some of the physiological measurements, energy conservation, recycling, some improvement in biological efficiencies. Let's address a few of these right now, if we can. This is the one that got huge arguments, huge discussions, and that simply says that as cows eat more dry matter, and you see this is multiples of maintenance. So 1 is 10, a 3 would be 30 mcals. That's going to get you about 70 pounds of milk. 5 mcals will get you a boatload of milk in terms of milk yield per day. You can see it listed there on the red line. But notice the bad news. Digestive, because of the higher rates of passage, less residence time in the rumen, going through the digestive tract quicker, we lose some feed efficiency, which means these high-producing cows kind of flatline out there. And so the question is there a way that we can achieve the blue line? And that would be huge. You can see we'd go from a 20%, 25% energy efficiency up to 35 to 37. Could we do that genetically? Could we do it by manipulating the diets, as Steve was implying? Huge. Should we be limiting dry matter intake to these high-producing cows? Boy, you talk about a can of worms there. I suggested that and got beat about the head and neck severely several times. Look at this one, Steve. We're in your bailiwick. Mark Hannigan from VPI presented this information. And if you're going to make lactose, this is milk sugar, obviously. If I'm going to make it directly from glucose, the cow can do that at a 92% efficiency. However, if I take that same starch, put it through a rumen VFA like propionate, goes to the liver, make it into glucose, then I drop down to 62%. So this thing simply screamed to me is, should we be feeding rumen-protected glucose to these really high-producing cows? Interesting. There sits that same effect on the protein side of the equation. You can see if cows can take it directly as amino acids, it's about an 80% efficiency. Now, if those amino acids come from rumen-protected amino acids, that has to have a better efficiency than if it's coming from microbial sources. But the point is, interesting. And then look at fat. If I go from volatile fatty acids to acetate and then made it into fat, that's a 58% efficiency. If I make it from amino acids, 67% efficiency. I don't think you want to write that one down. That doesn't sound very economical. But if I come from fat, this could be some of our rumen-protected fats, for example. It could be coming from my oil seeds. 97% efficiency of taking that fat and literally putting it into the pail. Steve, this has to excite you a little bit on your digestive efficiency, but also has to disappoint you a little bit in saying, you know what? It kind of takes the rumen out of the playing cards at this point. Now, here gets another one that got really hot pretty fast. And so Hoard's, you'll smile all the way to the bank because your little Jersey cows, you can see that, and remember, this is kilograms over here. So I've got basically about 1,100 pound big Jersey or small Holstein. The feed maintenance there you can see is about 11 pounds of dry matter. 11 pounds of dry matter. That's 5 kilos. Look at those big Canadian Holsteins down there with 7 kilograms of dry matter. So you can see that difference there is about 2 kilograms, about 4 to 5 pounds less feed per day to keep this cow alive. Now, if we can metabolically do something, that could even get sweeter, as we would say. Over on the right side, you'll see that we don't gain a great deal of efficiency defined traditionally as fat-corrected milk per unit of dry matter. There is a small trend there that our big cows give a little bit more milk, but the efficiency isn't huge. And remember, you got that feed bill right today in Illinois, Wisconsin, it's 12 cents per pound of dry matter. So we got 60 cents staring at us in terms of this big cow, little cow. And of course, the big question is, do we all have to have Jersey cows? And of course, our Holstein guys say, you know what, you can breed for smaller cows. So some of you dairymen online, you might be thinking about this for the next several generations. Should you be looking at a little different emphasis in terms of stature or size of dairy cattle? Now, Steve, and the rest of you mark this one. This is a take-home one. So it says, and again, this was put together by Mike Vanderhaar. I made this slide up, so I manipulated it a little bit, but it is his data. If you look at today, whole farm feed efficiency for energy, 21%, and protein, 28%. Our consumers will not accept that. Trust me, let's put our consumer hats. We will not accept that. Now, if you increase milk 10%, you can see I can increase energy by about almost 1 percentage point, but you can see protein, and you can see where this is going. So what happens if I have one more longevity? And that's why we're going to talk about this in April, Steve, a little bit. You can see I can play the efficiency game with one more lactation per animal. If I get animals in at a younger age, I reduce calving interval. If I change the protein level, and look at the bottom one, and that's why I said those of you that voted for the number 5, you were winners. You can see the biggest mover on this chart is reducing feed waste by 10%. And that means no genetics, and that means no digestive change. It simply says we just aren't going to waste the feed that's going out in front of these cows, either during harvest, during storage, during feeding times, or out there in the feed bunk. Boy, what a powerful, powerful point. And I guess this is a key part. I struggled if we should have finished with this one, Steve, but we put it here. Okay, so do we throw our hands up and discuss and say, well, I can't do anything about that? And the answer is, well, here are some areas that we're going to look at. Is there a way to reduce this loss of heat increment? You realize that when it gets down to 15 degrees, your dairy cow doesn't have to spend any more energy to stay warm. She is still in her thermal neutral zone area. So, of course, when it gets to be 100 degrees next summer, that's really, really bad news. Can we genetically somehow have lower gut losses? losses. That means the liver, the kidney, the heart probably not a big problem, but the liver is huge. Is there any way we can somehow make these animals lose less nutrients, making those kinds of conversions? Can we increase feed digestibility? That's pretty much a no-brainer. Is there something in the mammary gland we can do? And of course, we know with the accelerated calf programs that we can change the genetics of the mammary gland, controlling animal activity, less pasture. Trust me, when cows walk a half a mile every day and come back to be milked twice a day, they are burning the equivalent of sometimes 5 or 7 pounds of milk. So can we do that? What about grouping cows so we actually meet the nutrient needs of the animals? And Victor Cabrero gave a nice talk in that area, as did our Michigan State colleagues as well. And then, of course, the feed storage losses. And Rick Grant really zeroed in on this one here. And that's the big 100-pound gorilla right now in the room. So if you want to go away from the webinar saying, what's one of the take-home messages, that's one of them right there. I think cow size is another one, although I'll get in trouble saying that, and we move on. So Norman St. Pierre did a nice job here of kind of summarizing from his vantage point. He was one of the last speakers there. And so Norman said, and he's probably right, residual feed intake is really best for growing animals. But, the USDA data just fascinated me and says, well, I wanted to raise a question, but Norman would not cite and would not call on me to raise the question, what should we go to if I'm not going to use residual feed intake? And some of you that have taken our advanced dairy nutrition class know that we basically say most of our cows are eating about 2 pounds less than what the new NRC. So if you're going to do residual feed intake, whose equation are you going to be using? NRC 2001, NRC 1989, or some other model that's coming from Cornell or some feed company from there. We also talked a little bit about feeds are not homogeneous. And of course, economics become a big factor, no question. Feed efficiency, if it improves feed efficiency, one of the best ways to increase protein feed efficiency is underfeed protein, which means as a result, I can get cows up to 30% protein efficiency, but you're going to leave about a pound of protein that you're not going to sell. That's a lot of money. And of course, milk is always changing. Stage of lactation is going to have an impact. And then, of course, the question, which one are you going to pick? Energy, protein. The neat thing from that one European paper says it looks like we improve one, we improve the other one as well. Well, that ends up the research sector. Now, had we been face-to-face, we'd take questions right now, but we're zipping right along time-wise here. For some of you that are online, you're saying, well, gee, Mike, that's kind of interesting. What am I going to take home from today's webinar? That's one of the reasons we come to these webinars. What's some of the take-home messages? And so for the next 10 minutes, if I'm on schedule, we're going to do that right now, feed efficiency factors. Well, we're going to vote one more time. Jim is going to open up the poll, and it says, which area will give you the most improvement in feed efficiency on a dairy farm today? Increased forage quality, increased total ration dry matter, reduced days open, in other words, getting cows pregnant, lower somatic cell count, less mastitis, or fine-tune the protein in terms of amount of protein and the form of protein you're feeding you're feeding these animals. And so the polls are open. Steve, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I kind of like number one, but we'll see how this all plays out. I think they all could have some interesting results. Actually, reducing days open might be a possibility too.
Well, I tell you, Steve must be becoming Republican. He wants to vote 2 or 3 times there. We'll leave that alone. Anyway, I think we got, 82% of the vote. Shut it off, Jim. Man, my goodness gracious. What a bunch of voters. By the way, challenging, isn't it, guys and gals? These are all right answers, by the way. When I do my webinars, I put always all the right answers there. Otherwise, I don't learn anything. I think, first of all, lower somatic cell count, you got it right. The good news, Hoard's Dairyman has reported our somatic cell counts keep coming down. That's really, really good news. And the winner is, you can see there, is increasing forage quality. Actually, I would argue 69% of you voted for the same thing. If I increase forage quality, I increase ration digestibilities. Those two kind of go together. And so let's look at some data very quickly. This is some older data that I'm going to show you now. So if you've been to some of my discussions, you've seen this PowerPoint before. This is feed efficiency, looking at dry matter digestibility. These are actually some industry data. Each of those are different farms, and this is the home run right here. You can see that when my dry matter digestibility is down at 60, and that's where heifers are and dry cows, by the way, you can see what happens. And you can see when I get really high digestible rations, I get up to as high as 1.6. So you can see feed digestibility can move this 0.4 of a point. That's huge, guys. Guys and gals, that's huge. Now, you can do that with forage quality. Obviously, you can do that with distillers. You can do that with corn gluten feed. You can do the highly digestible NDFs. There's lots of ways of getting that done. Or rumen stabilizers could come into play as well. But there's your right answer. As far as I'm concerned, there's your right answer. This is some of Jimmy Clark's classic research. And again, you're going to have to study that at your leisure. What Dr. Clark did, he looked at 3 different levels of protein, and he looked also then looking at soya versus an animal protein blend over here. And 2 things that'll jump out at you. You can see as we go to the higher proteins, we have higher feed efficiencies up here. You also have higher MUNs. Okay, you environmentalists, you're going to go nuts on me. I hear you. And then you can also see in all cases here, when we went to the animal protein blend, which is a higher quality amino acid, soybean meal is nothing bad either, by the way, but you can see a nice increase there in all situations as I looked at this last night. But you can see my MUNs over here. And again, you can also have some milk production. I took that data out of there, but obviously the milk protein yields are reduced over here as well. Let's take a look at another one of our additives. I told you additives could come into play. Here sits rumenzin. Here are your different levels of rumenzin. Here sits your feed efficiency, and you can see some nice improvements when we get in these other levels of feed efficiency. If you look at improvement here, you can see this number. You might ask, Hutjens, what happened here? That's because I made this. Now, I calculated this number from their data set. This includes body weight gain. So when you put body weight gain in here, you even get a little bit more efficiency with this product. This is the work from Dave Shingothi's group looking at yeast culture. And again, you can see in terms of dry matter, feed efficiency, you can see under heat stress, this is heat stress months, a really nice improvement by about 6 to 7% improvement on feed efficiency using this data set from yeast culture. And here comes your heat stress. And again, this is one I generated. You can see this is my normal dairy efficiency. If I come over here under a small amount of heat stress, you can see only 86 degrees. Now you can see severe heat distress, I really get hammered. So had I put down heat stress, that should have been your number 2 vote. But hopefully most of us now have heat abatement, and that's in one of your webinars. You can go back to the Hoard Dairyman archive, and there's some information on that as well. Steve was second guessing himself a little bit. And for rightfully reason. This is Jim Lynn's work that he pulled together a couple years ago, and he went through all the literature. These are all different studies. So he and his grad student, you and I both know it was his grad student, did all the heavy lifting, but you can just see that once you get over about 200 days in milk, your feed efficiency really starts dropping 175 down here to about 0.25. So Steve, you're right. If you're sitting over here, hopefully not many of my farmers are over here, but boy, you really get hammered on feed efficiency when you get in these later lactation cows. And so when you were second guessing your vote, you were doing it very, very correctly. Well, we're getting down to our end of our webinar here, and we do have a few questions that have came in, and we'll get to those at the end, but let's go down to applying it on the farm. And the real power, in my view, for you dairy managers and you nutritionists, you consultants, you veterinarians out there, the real power on feed efficiency is change over time on your farm and understanding why it increased and why it improved. That's where the power is. Be careful going from farm A to farm B, going from the Hoard's farm, or even from Hoard's going from Jerseys to Guernseys. You want to be a little careful doing that because there's too many other factors going on. So here comes the magic number. So hang on to your hat. And this is the whole webinar for another day. And if you think this should be a good webinar, just let us know. We'd be happy to do it sometime for you. And here they are. These are all factors, if you go through the research that says can affect feed efficiency. I'm biased. I'm a little bit like Steve. I picked up my favorite 4. And my favorite 4 out of this whole list is feed digestibility, days in milk, rumen acidosis, and of course, somatic cell count. That may not be quite as critical if you have a low somatic cell count herd. There isn't a lot of room down here, meaning herds below 150,000. I'm not sure this one would stay orange anymore, but certainly these are all the different factors. And to me, these are the big 3 are listed here in orange for your pleasure. Now let's go to the dairy farm. as we wrap up our webinar here today. Measuring on the dairy farm. And there are 3 ways that you and I can look at this. The first one is a software program that's available free of choice, at least it was last year, from the Zinpro Corporation called FED, their FED program. Feed efficiency, diagnostics, I'm not sure. Maybe one of you want to type that in. We have somebody from Zinpro. You can tell me what FED stands for. I was going to Google that this morning, didn't get it done. But you can actually go to the farm and actually measure that. So you can see everything on the farm. This will take you probably 6 or 8 hours to calculate and get all this information. The herd will have to be on DHI records, and this all has to be all entered into the program. So they will actually correct the feed efficiency for age of cow, lactation number, milk components, body condition score, walking distances, temperature, stage of lactation, other variables as well. Great program, but you're going to spend some time doing it. So it is out there. It's available. Second, you can actually go to herds. This is a Midwest dairy herd, actual hard data from last year. And some of you could probably guess who this is, but we'll leave it at that. You can see there are some 3,000 cows. He has got 9 production groups here. There's a whole story here for you to look at. Here you can see 400 cows, 121 pounds of milk. He's averaging 56 days in milk, 2.1 feed efficiency. Scares the crap out of me. Excuse my French. Primarily because these cows, once you get over 1.8 to 1.9, they've got to be taking body weight off. We went and looked at this pen, and sure enough, the owner said, these cows are losing weight. I can see that they have lost weight over the last several weeks. Now you can come down here. You can see 148 days in milk. These cows are still smoking right along. Now you can see these late lactation cows are not dumb. They are going to put some weight back on. They're down to 1.3 feed efficiency, averaging 357 days in milk. So this is catch-up time. So again, you're going to keep pouring. This is a one-group TMR, a one-group TMR. Now, if you start grouping these cows, now things get a little dicier, because hopefully you're going to key in, but you can again to see what's going to happen. Look at his heifers, a lot smarter heifers. They must be from Illinois. That's all I can figure out. But you can see their high production string here at 100 days in milk, averaging 83 pounds of milk with a 1.78 feed efficiency. That's borderline being too high. Now, those of you guys that have mastitis, look at this. 32 cows in the mastitis pen. That's 1%. That's very good, by the way. 1%. Look at their feed efficiency. 1. So you can see mastitis and hospital cows really get hammered on this farm. How does he get this information? They have a milk recorder scale by pen. So each pen comes through, automatically get weighed every day. So he knows every day how much milk comes out of each of these pens. He also has a weigh-back system, a feed watch system. I'm not sure it's feed watch, but it's one of those systems in which they actually know the feed intake. And of course, he feeds from an empty feed bunk, so there are no weigh-backs. Another argument for another day, but there's no weigh-back. So this is hard data. He gets this every day on his farm. And what a powerful, powerful tool. So certainly a big lesson here. Some of you out there, you have farmers who can get this. He had to write his own software program to do that. They might not be out there, but he had all the information. He had to just marry the 2 sources of information and get it dumped out every day. And then he does it on a weekly basis. So he has 7 values come in because he says he has too much noise if he tries to interpret that every day, and went with that. Okay, my person came in, and who gets the kudos on that one? Do we know who did that? FED stands for Feed Efficiency Determinator. So, Jim Baltz did it. He Googled it. I thought I didn't find it. Anyway, that's what it stands for. The last one is, here's where you're going to be. And by the way, we have this on our website if you wish. You can actually give you a bunch of tools. All you have is what I call the Hutjens swag system. All you got is milk production of the bulk tank. You got a dry matter intake that may or may not be corrected, and you got DHI records. And with that information, you can go in and you can actually calculate, and using some base adjustments, we can correct for such things as days in milk. We can correct for a number of the variables that are very important, and you can actually come up with something. Well, take-home messages, Steve, as we wrap up here. Feed efficiency. I just want to argue it's another benchmark. I don't want to get into an argument with should it be management-level milk or marginal milk or income over feed costs. It's just another tool. Guys and gals, stay tuned. I think there's going to be some exciting things the next year or two are going to come out of this big research study, out of being out of Michigan State and from European countries. I think you got to be managing and monitoring feed efficiency on your dairy farms, and I think we're going to start looking at optimizing dry matter intake on dairy farms. With that, Steve, we'll turn it back to you, and you can wrap her up. Steve, are you going to wrap it up?
Okay, Mike, thank you much. Always, yeah, you're hearing me now?
Yes, you're coming through
fine.
You're
hearing me now? Okay, very good. Well, yes, Mike, wonderful job. Thank you very much. You always give us lots to think about, and particularly this time, some real big issues and tools that we're going to be looking at down the road. By the way, I think that large dairy probably was using a TMR tracker program, but we'll have to check into that later. Again, thanks for your great job today, and thanks to Digistar for their sponsorship of today's webinar. We had a great turnout among listeners out there, and we surely appreciate it and hope that you enjoyed it and learned as much as we did. This is my time to remind you participants that you'll be getting a short survey sent to you by email here in the next couple of days, and we appreciate your responses on that. Just takes a couple of minutes to fill that out, and it'll help us plan future webinar sessions and make sure that we meet your needs. And of course, this webinar, after a few days, and all of the previous webinars are available on our archives. Just go to hoards.com, click on webinars, and you can go back and see the whole agenda of webinars in the past. More than 31,000 people since we started the program just a little 3 years ago have gone to our website and checked out our archives. Also want to mention that Hoard's Dairyman has a new newsletter, a free newsletter sent email each Monday morning, Hoard's Intel. For those of you that might be interested in that, we encourage you to go to our website and find out more about that. Hoard's Intel, Hoard's Dairyman Intel, new newsletter. And topically, Mike, you have your Dairy Day programs coming up. You want to say just a couple of minutes, a couple of words about that? You have one in Freeport.
Yes, Steve, we have a Dairy Day program. Phil Cardoza, Jim Drakeley, myself, Dave Fisher, and we have a panel on finding the next 10 pounds of milk on dairy farms. It will be the 21st of January, if that's a Tuesday. I don't have my calendar in front of me here. If that's a Tuesday, we'll be in Freeport. On Wednesday, we'll be in Bloomington, Illinois, and on Thursday down in Centralia at the junior colleges. So, again, if you're interested, we'd love to have you. You can pre-register if you wish. And if you go to Illinois Milk Producers Association, they are the sponsoring organization. You can go to their website, IMPA or Illinois Milk Producers Association, and you can find the brochure and the website, or you can go to Hoard's Dairyman, and it was in their December issue. It has the website listed in there as well. We'd love to have you.
Great, Mike, and those of you that are with us can see that the next webinar will be February 10th. Dan Wary from the University of British Columbia will be talking about cow welfare on larger farms. I'm really looking forward to that one. He's going to address the public image that cows on larger farms don't have quite as good welfare conditions and humane handling, and he is going to address that, and I think he'll have some very interesting observations and some data for us on that. With those comments made, Mike, do we have some questions?
Yeah, we have a few that are coming in right now, in fact, and we will welcome you. We'll bang these off pretty fast. Some of them I can't answer, so that they will even go faster as far as that goes. The first one says, what is the current level of feed waste now that causes a 10% improvement to be so economically impactful? And according to one of my colleagues in the Midwest, his number is around 12 to 14% of the feed is wasted. The best example is bunker silos. The word is, now if you've got oxygen barriers that will change those and how you manage and how you pack them. But I believe Brian Holmes has a 15 to 16% waste in bunker silos. Baled hay historically can be somewhere in the 15 or 20% wastage, because remember, I'm going to lose maybe 8 or 10% in the field. So remember, when we say feed waste, we're looking both in the field, in the storage, in the mixing process, and also then the sorting and the waybacks. So his number was around 12 or 14%, and I believe it. So I think 10% is very achievable on most farms. Now, I may get some real flack on that, and you guys and gals jump in on me at this point. Second question. You said consumers would not find efficiency levels acceptable, what we listed, 21% for energy, 28% protein. What do you think is acceptable from their perspective, and is that a reasonable expectation? What scares the daylights out of me, and that's a great question, if you look at what the fish and the chicken industry do, and their feed conversions are just unbelievably, amazingly high. And so I'm maybe somebody who knows that number, I'd have to Google it, and Jim is busy right now to Google it, but I think they're looking at somewhere in the 40 or 50% range. But so they're going to say, why should I drink milk, realizing that only 20% of the nutrients that are fed to those animals that are going to be utilized by we as consumers? Now, you and I will argue a lot of those are going to be byproduct feeds, are going to be forages and grasses and that whole story there. But the net effect is it's still kind of a scary number when we start looking at feeding the next 3 million people coming into this world, as you and I see those projections. And that can be an argument, maybe a webinar in the future as well. Certainly, Cornell argues that they can get feed efficiencies up to nearly 40% on the protein side of the equation using very unique rations, using animal proteins, using unique diets there. So I don't think we should be scared, but I think we've got to get our protein numbers up in the mid-30s to answer his questions, and our energy's got to be getting up in that low 30 range. So I think to answer his question, 30% energy efficiencies and 40% protein efficiencies, and I think I can sell milk all day long with all those other caveats. Question I can't answer: any new information from the International Feed Efficiency Symposium held in November in the Netherlands? And I was lucky I could get Chicago, much less the Netherlands. So good to know. I didn't know there was. There may be a proceedings out there. I just, ignorance is bliss. But boy, the one in September was just very, very, very well done. Any thoughts on how or if we should limit dry matter intake in high-producing cows? Anyone looking at providing a minimal amount of undigestible NDF per head per day? I am. I think you're going to see the new test that just came out from Wisconsin, Total Track NDF digestibility. You're going to see that number. And my number is about 6, that's a Hutjens swag, by the way, about 6 pounds of indigestible NDF. I also looking at my rations between 3 and 4% lignin and try to marry those two numbers together. So I think we're going to get that number locked in here in terms of indigestible. Should we limit dry matter intake? And the beef people say it works like a charm. One of my good dairymen who no longer is in business, but he had a wonderful herd, said, you know, Mike, you feed an empty bunk and cows come out of the parlor. They really attack feed. They really eat feed. And he always felt he had to have his bunks empty for 1 or 2 hours. And he just thought he got more milk and better intakes. Wow. And the guy at that time had a 25,000 pound herd average 10 years ago. Who am I to argue with that? So interesting thoughts. Might we want to limit dry matter intake, especially in certain groups of cows? I'm not going to do it to fresh cows. I may not want to do it to high producing cows, but boy, kind of interesting. Really interesting. What should our feed efficiency be benchmark for first calf heifers with a growth requirement? I'm saying probably under 1.7 is my Hutjens swag. Under 1.7. I like to use as a benchmark both the mature cows and the heifers at the same stage of lactation, which usually is the fresh pen. And I'm saying my cows should be 1.7 to 1.8, my heifers 1.6 to 1.7, and that's exactly what that herd had that we saw a bit earlier. So that'd be my best estimation. I'll bet you we'll have that answer from Michigan State's NEFA grant in another year or so once all that 8,000 animals come in as well. Interesting comment from a good colleague of mine. He said, remember, those efficiencies for poultry and aquaculture are on live weight gain typically. Putting it on a marketable product will drastically clean those numbers and bring them close to dairy numbers. That's really a great comment. Great comment. That may get you a piece of pie, sir. And sir, I see who you are. We always have had pie bets already. In fact, I've gotten a whole pie from him already. So we'll leave it at that. Gives you a little idea who's been winning those pie bets. That's a good point. That I stand corrected. Thank you very much. Last question, and then we're done, and we're just about out of time. In heat-stressed cattle, what additives would you recommend to increase consumption and improve digestibility? Wow. Well, to me, the easy answer there is going to be the rumen buffer, a good rumen buffer. There's some neat research collected years ago that says when cattle under heat stress, rumen pH goes down naturally about 0.2 of a point, meaning if it was normally 6.2, it would go down to a 6. And that may be related to blood flow because as cows go under heat stress, they change blood flow pattern. And that's why we lose some of those digestibility and feed efficiency is because we have a different blood flow going through those animals. So the buffer would be pretty straightforward. Certainly, my yeast product would come to mind pretty quickly because anything to stabilize the rumen fermentation. There may be some DFMs out there that would work very effectively, direct-fed microbials. So anything that would stabilize and maintain digestibility in that ration would really, really be a plus, especially when farmers start adding fat to the ration, which is a common thing under heat stress, just because now you see why. You saw that efficiency. They can take that fat, that preformed fat, and it doesn't cause as much rumen factors, depending, again, of course, the source of the fatty acids sitting in that fat product. And again, the rumen stabilizer may come into play as well. So those would be the ones I'd be looking at, especially would be those three I listed. Great, good question. Very good question. Steve, I think I've either frustrated everybody they want to ask a question or I've been corrected, and we'll stop at that, turn it back to you, and let you give the benediction.
Well, we're right on the time, Mike. Excellent. Again, a very stimulating presentation today. Lots of food for thought, and we thank you, and we thank Digistar for their support, and we also thank Jim Baltz for his technical assistance, and we thank all of you who are with us today. Many of you are still online with us, and we appreciate your participation in our webinars and hope to have you back, and we'll hope to see you on February 10th when we'll be talking about cow welfare on larger dairies. So look forward to having you with us then. And that's all from here.